My guest this week is the American anti-gun violence activist Fred Guttenberg. Fred's 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, was killed at her high school alongside 16 others by a teenage gunman. I want to talk to him about how so many have become desensitized to gun violence and whether he thinks his great friend, President Joe Biden, can really tackle the issue. Fred, thank you so much for being with me and talking to all of us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
I had to start by making sure we heard just something about your daughter, Jamie, first of all, because this is why we're here. And I wanted to ask if you could be as kind to tell us a little bit about what she was like.
My daughter was what every parent would hope for in a child. She was kind, she was beautiful, she was decent, she was tough, she was well-behaved. My daughter was a competitive dancer. That's how she spent her time out of school, constantly practicing to dance. But what she also was is somebody who understood that not all kids have the same abilities. And so she dedicated her personal time when she wasn't in school, when she wasn't dancing, to volunteering for different groups of kids with differing abilities to make sure they had all the same types of opportunities for social connections and for development. When she was in school, she despised bullies and would put herself in the middle of somebody bullying and somebody being bullied to make it stop. To the point where, as her dad, I sometimes got real nervous about it. But that's who she was, you know? And I wasn't gonna stop her from being that amazing person. She had her life figured out. She knew what she wanted going forward. She wanted to be a pediatric physical therapist. She dreamt of working in a place called the Paley Institute, where they do surgeries on kids with limb deformities to help a child walk for the first time. She wanted to be married by the time she was 25. She had life figured out. She was amazing.
Yeah, she sounds like she had a lot figured out and a lot of ambitions and hopes. And I suppose something that you have spoken about and I know would be a situation any parent would find themselves in if they were in your situation, which sadly many parents are in America. Part of your work is looking at that.
Yeah.
Is you will have rerun that day many times in your mind. If you don't mind me asking this as well, I did want to ask what you remember about that morning she went off to school.
Well, let's start with the fact that it was Valentine's Day, February 14th. And it was a perfectly normal morning. And I say normal with all the good and the bad, you know. Yeah. The kids were getting ready for school and they were running late. And being siblings, they were blaming one another. My son was the driver. He was gonna drive them both. And because they were running late, I was rushing them out the door. And I kept on telling them, you gotta go, you're gonna be late. You gotta get to school. And those were the last words to my two children that morning. My last words to my son and my daughter that morning were not, I love you. It was, you gotta go, you're gonna be late. I was sending them to school. I never expected that later that day, I would find out I would never get the chance again to tell my daughter how much I love her, but I didn't do it that morning. And it is something I will live with for the rest of my life. It is the reason why I tell every parent and everybody who loves somebody else to make sure you never missed a chance to look someone in the eye and tell them eyeball to eyeball how much you love them, because you never know when you won't get that chance again.
It's such an important message. Thank you for sharing that, Fred. I really appreciate it. And
thank you.
You are then in your day, it's February 14th, and going about your business as usual.
Yeah.
And how do you learn something is wrong, is there a phone call? How does this knowledge start to reach you?
Just after 2 p.m., I get a phone call from my son. And, you know, kids in school today have cell phones, so there's regular communication throughout the day. And my son calls me just after 2, and he was a bit of a jokester. So he calls and he says, "Dad, there's a shooting at my school." My initial instinct was, what the heck is he talking about? You know, that's a weird thing to make a joke about, but what is he talking about? But he immediately then said, "And I can't find Jamie." Now, my son looked after his sister like a hawk. He would never play games with her safety. And the second he said that, I knew this wasn't a joke and he was serious. And so I said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "They're making us all run, but I can't find Jamie." And I said, "You need to run." He goes, "But I can't find Jamie." He kept saying it to me over and over and telling me he wants to turn around and go to where they know the shooting was happening, that building. And I'm like, "You can't do that. You need to run. I'll worry about your sister." And as I'm on the phone with him and he's crying to me that he can't find his sister, there's gunshots. As I'm on the phone with him, it's the shots on the 3rd floor. It's the shots that were killing his sister. He listened to them and I listened to them on the phone while I was speaking to him, convincing him to run. Because of those shots, I was able to finally convince him to keep just running as far from that noise as he could, and he made it to safety. Unfortunately, the rest of that afternoon was all about my wife and I trying to find our daughter, hoping she was okay, hoping the fact that we couldn't reach her was only because maybe she dropped her phone and eventually she'd call us from somebody else's phone. It was getting to the hospital so that we could try to find her there, hoping she was now injured and couldn't reach us. And it wasn't until, around 5:30-ish when we learned through a friend of mine who was a police officer that she was shot and killed.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I really am. And apart from all the things that will come with such devastation, your life really changed that day in a completely other way because of how we're speaking now, which is part of your message. You suddenly found yourself in a position where you knew about the violence, the gun violence, the mass shootings in America, but you obviously until that point hadn't known about them in quite the same way. And you find yourself with a cause.
Listen, I live with this intense guilt that my voice wasn't a part of this before it was my family. I'll never get over that, but it's a part of this cause now. The crazy thing is, it didn't happen immediately. The first 24 hours were actually a blur. While I knew my daughter was killed, I hadn't really started to focus on the notion that this was gun violence until the next day at night when I went to the Parkland Vigil. And at that vigil, the mayor asked if I wanted to take her speaking slot. And I hadn't prepared anything, but I said, what the heck? And I went up there and I looked at this crowd of people, thousands of people crying with candles and lights. And that was the moment where it hit me that this was gun violence that broke my family, that broke my community. And I just remember telling people at that vigil about my daughter, but saying to everyone in the crowd, this time, gun violence came to the wrong family, to the wrong dad, and to the wrong community. And I went home that night and I walked in my house and I said to my family and friends who were there, who didn't go to the vigil, I'm gonna break that effing gun lobby. And it's been my mission ever since, is to break that lobby and to break their grip on our legislators and getting effective legislation to do something about gun violence in America. And I can't stop.
Well, there are many people who are very grateful to you, because they would also say that they would be scared to do it, because of the carrying of guns and because of the threats, because of the risk.
Sure.
Are you ever scared to speak up and say anything because of what's happened to your family as well?
Yeah. Well, because of what happened to my family, I've lost this capacity for fear. What my daughter had, running down the hallway with an active shooter carrying an AR-15 at her back. People need to remember, my daughter knew. It wasn't like she was caught by surprise. She knew what she was running from. She was in the hallway. She was the second to last to be shot. She made it to within 1 second of safety. What she had was fear. Genuine, real fear that I'll never, ever fully be able to understand or comprehend. And because I'll never have the level of fear that she had, you can't intimidate me anymore. You can't, words won't do it. What I really have found more than that is the majority of people in this country have been supportive, have been amazing, and give me hope. Because the majority of people in this country are like me. It's not that they're anti-gun, it's they're anti-gun violence. They want to do something about that. And so for every person who tries to intimidate or threaten, I can genuinely say I don't care. But to everybody who understands what my mission is and is supportive, I can genuinely say thank you and I hear you, because I do.
And yet, what you said, and I'm very struck by it, I'm moved by it, where you said at the beginning of our conversation that you have guilt about not adding your voice before, doesn't mean you didn't care. It's about something else, which I wanted to get your view on, which is, how do you get people to care to the point where they also push for change? Or rather, how do you stop people from being desensitized to this because it's so common, gun violence in America? How do you do that?
It's such a great question. And I look back, and I'll just use Sandy Hook as an example. I felt horrible emotion over it, anger over it. I watched all the news reporting over it, and I did nothing. I did nothing. And I lived in this bubble. I mean, this was Parkland, Florida. This was the community, actually a lot like Newtown, where you never see this happening. And I allowed myself to stay in this bubble. Part of what I do now to help people care, people always say to me, I can't imagine how you feel. I go out of my way every chance I get to help people imagine how I feel, to help people imagine the terror, to help people imagine the violence, and to help people imagine themselves in that and not me. Because I think at the end of the day, the more people realize, while this happened to somebody else, but it could happen to me when I go to the mall, it could happen to me when I go to the shopping center or the movie. Yeah. It could happen to my family when I send them to school. The more likely they are to become part of solving it. And I will tell you, if you look at the last 3 elections in this country, doing something about gun violence has been a top voting issue. It has changed election outcomes. And I think people are listening now. And if you look at polls, over 80% of America wants to solve this. We are winning the fight, but moving the political system in this country is a lot of work.
Well, I mean, you say that as well, but I'm also aware that we've seen recently in states where there have been mass shootings, politicians re-elected who are anti-gun reform as well. I mean, there is that reality. They may have been voted for other policies. Politics is not a one policy thing, of course, but you've spoken very publicly about your bond with the president, with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I know that he was an important figure for you, and a relationship you say you wouldn't have without what happened to you and your family. But do you have faith that he can be the president to make that change? Because, there isn't that much longer left in some ways, and we don't know what's going to happen next.
Without question, not only do I have faith, I can actually point to the fact that something has already been accomplished that is historic and hasn't happened in over 30 years, which was back in April, he signed the Safer Communities Act, a real piece of gun violence prevention legislation that does really big things to start to finally bend the curve and reduce gun violence. Is it everything I could have hoped for? Is it everything I would have wanted? Well, no, it's not. But it was a real significant package that was able to get bipartisan support. And I'm actually, to this day, so thankful for his leadership on that, for the leadership of people like my friend Senator Chris Murphy, who negotiated in the Senate nonstop to get it done. Even when, and he will tell you this, I didn't have faith that he could get it done. I never saw him being able to accomplish in the Senate what he did, but he got it done.
But Fred, there's been more violence since. There's been more mass shootings. How do we move, or how do you and the people you're working with move to stop that? What needs to change?
Well, listen, and it's a great question. If, we passed this back in April. If you look back to when my daughter was killed in 2018, there were about 300 million weapons in America. By the time we passed this legislation, there were 400 million weapons and ghost guns. So the reality is we haven't, where the legislation passed is going to be forward-looking, and I believe will have a real dramatic impact.
Right.
But we have to come to grips with the reality of the numbers of weapons that we have. I will tell you, for me personally, the holy grail of solving gun violence in America at this point, because of the numbers of guns that are out there, is through ammunition. And I am working to pass something in the United States Congress called Jamie's Law, which seeks to extend background checks to ammunition. There's no requirement for a background check on ammunition. So you have all these weapons out there, many of which are in the hands of people who are what's called a prohibited purchaser. So they have to get their gun illegally, or they steal it, or they trade for it, and they walk right into the store and buy the bullets. If we can get background checks on ammunition, we stop that. We'll save lives immediately. And so for me, that's the holy grail right now of solving this problem, and I'm not going to stop.
That's fascinating. It makes a lot of sense because of what's already in play, like you talk about. And, we will see what happens because it's so political and it's such a strong lobby.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a very simplistic way of asking something quite complex, but because you've looked at this so much, who do you blame for your daughter's killing?
A lot of people. Let's start with all of those who failed to stop it when they had different chances to do so. Let's start with the person who made the decision to do it. But also, I can't not focus on the political reality that we live in a country where that killer, in spite of all the red flags, was able to buy the gun. And so I do blame the legislators who failed to do anything meaningful for all of the years. I look at my daughter was born in 2003. The year she was born, there was actually a ban on assault weapons in America that expired in 2004. And you can look at the trajectory of sales after that ban expired. You then fast forward to 2007 and the Heller Supreme Court decision, which put in place this whole phrasing around common use. And the industry built common use into a business model, and they kept on manufacturing and flooding our streets with more and more and more of these weapons every year, to the point where they were no longer just being used from a hunting or sport perspective. They were now being used overwhelmingly in daily violent incidents. So I blame everybody who's a part of building that system, whether it's the Supreme Court decision, whether it's all the legislators who failed to do anything to prevent this explosion of weapons on our streets. I blame them all. And those legislators who still exist, who refuse to acknowledge the significance of this problem and who fight back and who use BS, lies, to continue to push that system, they have blood on their hands right now. I blame them right now. And so stopping the next one requires defeating still more people, and we're going to continue working to do it.
You mentioned right at the top of that list, unsurprisingly, rightly, the killer, who hasn't been given the death sentence. Instead, it's life in jail. What was your reaction to that quite recent decision?
For the past almost 5 years now, my life has really been very much wrapped around what's going to happen to him and the trial and that outcome. And because there was going to be this trial, I wanted him to get the ultimate punishment. I wanted him to get the death sentence. And when the verdict was delivered, for a couple of days, I was actually very distraught. But then I went to visit my daughter at the cemetery. And I always come back from a visit with her, maybe feeling smarter, because in her own way, she communicates with me. And I left the cemetery and I realized no matter what happened to the killer, every day going forward, I'm still going to be visiting my daughter at the cemetery. Nothing changed. Nothing changes. And it put me in a place where I was finally able to put the killer out of my head. He got the punishment he got. He's going to one of the most miserable places on earth in the Florida Department of Corrections. He will face ultimate judgment there, I'm sure. But I'll still be visiting my daughter at the cemetery. And because of that, it was in that moment where I was finally able to put that killer out of my head. He's no longer in my head. I no longer think about him. I no longer wonder what's going to happen to him. I no longer have any second or minute of my time focused on him. I'm no longer losing sleep over him. And so while I was disappointed in the verdict, I'm actually now in a healthier place than I've been for almost 5 years.
Oh, well, that's very good to hear. And important as well, because the only thing we can control are our reactions.
Yeah.
I'm also just aware, picking up what we were talking a little bit about before, that we still, amazingly, and I say that in the truest sense of the word, have people who write horrific things about these mass shootings, who don't believe them, conspiracy theorists. You'll be very familiar with this terrain, sadly. What do you think of Alex Jones?
I think Alex Jones is the lowest form of humanity that exists. I wish him nothing but terrible outcomes because of what he did to other people and continues to do. In spite of these horrible financial legal judgments against him, he hasn't stopped behaving badly. He is a liar. He is somebody who has directed violence at others. He has used his platform not for good, but for evil. And so in his remaining days on earth, I hope he pays a horrible price directed by the courts and pursued by those families that he spent all those years harassing. And I am certain that when his time is up, he will pay a final judgment as well. He is as low a form of human life as can exist.
You talk about use of platform. I also noticed that when the new owner of Twitter the other day, Elon Musk, posted a photo recently of a bedside table, cans of Diet Coke, also a gun, actually transpired to be a toy gun, which I didn't realize at the time.
Sure.
You chose to post.
It actually doesn't matter whether it was real or not, because the message he was trying to deliver is what matters.
Yeah, I mean, I just meant, I didn't know, you know, but it was a very striking image. You posted in response to that, talking about the fact that your daughter was killed. Every day children are killed because of irresponsible adults. What do you feel about that, having also reflected on it?
It's so strange now watching what Elon Musk is turning himself into. He is a business person who I was mesmerized by for so many years, who I thought did the coolest things. And if he had a vision, I automatically thought, if Elon Musk thinks he can pull it off, I'll bet you he can. I looked at him that way until his pursuit of Twitter and what he's turned it into, which is a cesspool of indecency and the worst of humanity. And that photo that he posted is just an example. He was, for whatever reason, he felt important to post this image of guns by the side of his bed. I spend my life every day trying to talk about responsible gun ownership and locking weapons up. Two of my dear friends, people I wish I didn't know, but I do because of gun violence, Mike and Kristen Song, their son Ethan was killed because of an unlocked weapon. And so I don't care that that wasn't a real weapon, because he didn't say that in his message. He implied he's keeping these unlocked weapons by the side of his bed. And I find that dangerous. And I find that encouraging to others to do dumb, stupid, irresponsible things. Why he's pursuing this path in his life now, why he's behaving like the richest troll on earth instead of this successful business person that he had previously been, I can't make sense of, but I hope he fails.
Well, we'll see how that transpires in terms of that platform and the ownership of that business, and perhaps also what changes are or are not made. Just finally, what do you think Jamie would make of what you're doing and your fight and how you're going about it?
You know, it's funny, my wife and I have had numerous conversations about that. On one hand, she would be completely embarrassed by the attention, because while my daughter was always out there and performing, she was still a shy little kid, and she would be completely embarrassed by the attention. On the other hand, in my home, my wife and my son are very different than me. They were never as into the news and politics the way I was, but Jamie was. Jamie was the one who would sit with me and watch. And when I would get angry at things that were happening or uplifted by things that were happening, she was with me. She was participating. And so Jamie, because of that, and because of her toughness, because of her dislike of bullies, because of her concern for others, she would be on the one hand embarrassed, but on the other hand, I know she would have her hands on my back saying, "Go, Dad, do this. Let's save the next one."
She sounds like my kind of girl, getting very into her news, her politics, and trying to, you know, stand up, I suppose, for what she believes. Thank you so much for telling us about her, and also your work today. I really appreciate the time and the insights.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being with us. Until we meet again, do take care and goodbye.